Welcome to Conversations. Today, I'm going to start a series of conversations to discuss Dr. Jaishankar's new book, Why Bharat Matters. And so please subscribe to Conversations, press the bell icon, like this video, and share it with more and more people so they can join in the conversation about this interesting book. Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host, and as promised, I'm going to do a short series of conversations about India's External Affairs Minister or Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar's new book, Why Bharat Matters. It is very unusual for a sitting foreign minister to write a book during his term. Given especially how busy he was, it must be amazing for him to be able to take out time from his foreign policy and executive duties to be able to pen this book, which has 11 chapters in it. But anyway, it's a very interesting book. It comes straight from a practitioner, theoretician, scholar. And so you could argue that he is essentially speaking on behalf of the current government in New Delhi and also on behalf of the government. And so the vision that he's sharing about India's foreign policy and how India sees the world and how India sees itself surely can't be very different from how he sees it and what he's writing in this book. So while this is not like an official, shall we say, document produced by the Ministry of External Affairs, it is fair to assume that there is a very high degree of correspondence between his views as a scholar, as an observer of India and India's foreign policy, and as also someone who has over the last 40 years participated in policy making and policy execution, and now he holds the highest position in foreign policy as a Minister of External Affairs. So in that sense, we could say that he is speaking on behalf of the government of India to a great extent. That doesn't mean that whatever he says is something that is officially endorsed. This is his personal view, but he has chosen to publish a book while still in office, so that's an important point to note. So the book has a preface and it has 11 chapters and acknowledgements at the end. You can see the chapters here they are, presenting a worldview, foreign policy in you, the state of the world, back to the future, a transformational decade, making friends and influencing people, Quad, a grouping foretold, dealing with China, reimagining security, the roads not taken, why Bharat matters. And the last chapter is also the title of the book. And so basically these are 11 different chapters which overlap and basically together tell the story of India in the diplomatic arena. So he starts with a preface, which basically he explains as to why he's doing the book. And he says that as someone who has been part of the foreign policy making, India is changing India's foreign policy, he asserts, has changed significantly. And so he thought it best to chronicle it for us. And we are grateful for that because it really takes us behind the scenes, so to speak. So I'm going to start with the chapter 1, presenting a worldview. Worldview essentially means how you look at the worldview, the lenses through which you look at the worldview, the ideology, the values, the normative preferences, the conceptions that you have about yourself, your identity, and the world. All of them together create a lens through which you see the world. So it is how do you see the world? Not only that, but there is also a moral judgment involved in that, and also how you wish to see the world. So that's why worldviews are often important. It's very difficult to take meaningful action without having a worldview, because often our actions, our policies derive meaning from this worldview. So he starts off, and as you can see from the first page, he says, 3 years ago in my earlier book, and I have done a review of his earlier book, The India Way, both in English and Hindi. And at the end of this video, you will find linkages to the reviews of those reviews of his book. So please go ahead and take a look at it. I promised to keep it short, and I'll try to do that. So essentially, he starts by something that I felt I needed to comment. He says, I had urged that this is a time for us to engage with America. Obviously, no country can afford not to engage with America. Manage China, obviously, the rising power, cultivate Europe, reassure Russia, bring Japan into play, draw neighbors in, extend the neighborhood. So this is how he had felt when he was not the foreign minister, writing that book in 2018, how India should have approached foreign policy. The reason why I'm pointing this out is because it is interesting to me that before he became foreign minister, he did not feel the need of talking about the global south or Africa. So he does not mention Africa in it or the global south. He's looking only at major powers. So that was an interesting observation. You can make whatever you like of it. He does talk very briefly about the global south in this chapter in the context of India's successful hosting of the G20. But to me, it was interesting that when he was not foreign minister, and I think this was between his end of his bureaucratic career and before his political career began, he did not really talk about the global south, as you can see from this comment. He identifies what he thinks are the 5 important phenomena that have dominated the quarter century. So for the last 25 years, basically the 21st century, he says that these are the 5 important phenomena. It's very interesting that he did not use the word drivers of international relations or global geopolitics, but he says these are phenomena, things that are happening, and the 5 phenomena that he identifies are globalization, rebalancing, multipolarity, impact of technology, and the games that nations have always played, which means in geopolitical intrigue. For basically, perhaps this is also a veiled reference to China and its heightened geopolitics, and the US also plays lots of games. It is interesting that as he goes on, he says what is really happening is that in this century, there's a rebalancing taking place. What he means by rebalancing is that the relative balance of power between countries are changing. And so they are realigning themselves in order to maintain the global balance of power. For example, one example would be that with the rise of China, the United States has felt the need to create a new kind of alliance called the Quad to contain China. So this balancing of China, or the rebalancing of a more powerful China, is leading to creation of this new alliance called the Quad. So he says rebalancing is something that he feels is going to create multipolarity. I'm not very sure about that. Dr. Jaishankar talks a lot about multipolarity. He thinks that the world is multipolar, but I'm not very sure. The world still has the United States as a very dominant military power. It still contributes 26% of the global GDP. And where the United States is, I mean, look at the US dominating Europe and now back in the Middle East. And there is nobody trying to balance or challenge the US, especially in the Middle East. At least with the case of Russia, India, and China have to some extent balanced the economic pressures on Russia by increasing their imports from Russia. But I'm not very sure that we live in a multipolar world. In a multipolar world, there ought to be maybe 7-8 players with roughly 12 to 15% of the global GDP. But here you have 2 players who have more than 20% share of the global GDP, each one of them, China and the US, and then the rest of them. So if you look at China, which is close to $21 trillion, and you have the US, which is $27 trillion, and then the third economy is $5 trillion. It's so far away. So at least in the economic sphere, you do not see multipolarity, and I'm not sure where that is true in the military arena either. But nevertheless, he feels that the rebalancing is creating a multipolar world. Even though India seems to be more and more aligned with the existing established power, the US, through the Quads and all the strategic partnerships. So rather than creating a multipolar world, India, through its partnership with the US, is essentially cementing US hegemony. Of course, how can you write a book on world politics without talking about India? And so he identifies the puzzle and the conundrum that the US has become for the rest of the world. So take a look at it. He says the US, whose dominance is clearly not what it was in the past. So this hint towards US decline, that it has changed, is indisputable. What it leads to will not be sure. So basically, he's saying that the US has declined. What will become of the US is very much a matter of debate. And recent events have demonstrated that neither its capabilities nor its influence should be underestimated. So even though the US has declined, it should not be underestimated. So that is where the puzzle lies. Is this a unipolar world still? The US has declined, US influence has declined, but the US enjoys so much relative power over even its next competitor that it is impossible to ignore. And then he makes this point that you can see on this sheet where he talks about political polarization within societies. And he says that one of the important phenomena that are going on is political polarization. But if you notice, he did not identify that in the five things that are driving global politics. But he does mention that political polarization within societies is also a factor that the diplomacy of many states needs to take into account. I wish he had a good person giving him feedback, and so this could have become the sixth phenomena that is impacting global politics. But he talks about domestic changes in the US and China. What he does not recognize is that there is also domestic political polarization in India too. And it would have been wonderful if he had talked about how that political polarization is also impacting India's image abroad and India's foreign policy. So things like Manipur, protests around CIA, now the building of Ram Mandir, is that polarizing society or not? But anyway, he does recognize that international relations cannot ignore the domestic politics of great powers. And then he identifies what he sees his role as foreign minister, as well as his role in this book, which I fully agree with. He says, as a practitioner long associated with our diplomacy, there are two responsibilities that I seek to discharge through this book. One is to share the thinking of a rising power with a world that has become increasingly aware of that happening. The other is to communicate the necessity of accurately understanding the global developments to our own people. And I guess Khanversations is helping him in that task. So basically, he says he's trying to do two things in the India is becoming, shall we say, a rising power. And for those of you who have not read my recent ebook on India as a rising world power, you should take a look at it. I will post a link to that. The book is available free, so you can download that and read the book. It's pretty short. It has contributions from 6 important authors. Anyway, so he says that one thing he needs to do is to let the world also become aware of India. I mean, to explain to the world what India is and what India's story is as it becomes a rising power and as the world becomes increasingly aware of that change. But he feels that he also needs to educate the citizens of India about how the world is. So if you're going to become a power, then we should be interested in what's going on in the world. And I think that we can see that with a huge interest in geopolitics that we see on just YouTube channel. And so I agree with him on this. It's interesting. He's obviously the later part of this chapter, he essentially turns to and talks about the two epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata. He makes a very, very interesting point. And I've read both Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And in the advertisements of this book, I read that book was influenced by Ramayana, and I was wondering why he chose Ramayana over Mahabharata. Mahabharata is about war and geopolitics and lots of real politics, but he makes it a very interesting point. He says that the two epics both can inform policy and can help you understand the world, but what is interesting is that he says that Ramayana is about creating a rule-based order. So he says the whole life of Ram and the concept of Ram Rajya is about values and governance and policy, and therefore Ramayana is about rule-based order. So it's basically about ethics, whereas the Mahabharata is more about real politics and geopolitics. And so that is why he has chosen Ramayana, because he wants India's foreign policy to be informed by the rule-based values that come from Ramayana. I want to make a point for Muslim viewers. We have about, the last time I checked, about 15% of the audience, I think, is Muslim. Because both Rama and Mahabharata far predate the Quran and the Bible, and I think Ramayana probably also predates the Torah. It is, for Muslims, a very high possibility that from within the context of the Abrahamic faith, both the Rama and Mahabharata are revealed text. And so because they predate Islam and predate Christianity, there should be nothing fundamentally as a barrier for Muslims in India and elsewhere to take lessons from both Ramayana and Mahabharata and apply them in their lives and in their businesses and in their politics and public policy. So from that point of view, I think I recommend very strongly that everybody read this book, including Muslims. And don't let the fact that it might be influenced by Ramayana prevent you. There are many Muslims who have translated Ramayana into various languages and have read it. Dara Shikoh wrote about the Upanishads. And so that is a point that I do want to make for my Muslim audience. But look at the last sentence that he submits. I mean, look at the last sentence from his first paragraph. He says, it must first of all be confident of its values. And he's talking about a major power. A major rising power, however, needs more than just an accurate landscape analysis and the ability to act on it. It must first of all be confident of its own values and beliefs and base its policies on those convictions. These will draw from the totality of its culture, heritage, and traditions. This is very interesting. He says that a rising power actions should be influenced by its policies, and they will come from the totality of its culture, the totality of its heritage and its tradition. And then he says that is why India can only rise when it is truly Bharat. I don't understand why India can rise only while it is truly Bharat. India has been great in the past, a dominant power in the past, a very rich country. During the age of the Mughals, India had a 27% or 22% of the global GDP at one point of time. India has only 3 to 4% of the global GDP at the moment. So it was economically a major power in the past. And so is he by saying that only pre-Islamic Indian values can make India rise again? I don't know. It's not very clear, but that is, to me, a question. So to summarize the chapter, he's basically saying that the world is changing significantly. And one of the changing important elements is the decline of the United States. It has not declined significantly, but it is changing. Another feature about the changing world is clearly the rise of China. And of course, the phenomena of globalization, which is creating various other things such as rebalancing and multipolarity. But he also says India is also changing. And in that, he identifies two changes in India. One is a change in India's capacity and capabilities. It is obviously now the fifth biggest economy. It is richer, more powerful, has a lot of technological strengths, is scientifically advanced, just landed on the moon. And so one thing is that India's capabilities have increased. And then he also says the second difference in contemporary India is that it is more self-confident about its values and its civilizational heritage. And that is where this last sentence of the chapter comes. And so he's saying that, I mean, perhaps he's implying that foreign policy in the past was made when India was weak, not just materially, but also was not as confident of its own identity. But today, India is more confident about its identity and has more capability. So that is how I read this chapter. If you have also read it and you have any questions and if you have any comments, please share. We can have a conversation. But I would love to hear what you have to say, especially if you have read the chapter. Some of you have agreed. I will be posting this for members today, and in a couple of days, I will open it for the public after we have finished discussing it. So thank you for watching, and please read the book with me. It's available on Amazon. In the community channel, I have posted links to both Amazon India and Amazon US, where you can get it. In the US, it is only available in the Kindle form right now, and that is why you can see the screenshots that you are seeing are from the Kindle version of the book. So thank you very much for watching. I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Until next time, please read the second chapter. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to Khanversation, like this video, press the bell icon, and share it with your friends and network.